So I want to ask each one of you to think about a recent time, and here's the category for the recent time. Think about a recent time that someone said something nice to you, something encouraging to you, something that was complimentary or affirming to you. Take a moment now and think, hey, when's a recent time when someone did that? Do you all have it? Some of you no doubt have to think back just to a few hours ago. You heard someone say that. Some of you might have to think back to last week when someone said that. Some of you might be thinking, I have to think back to last year before I think of something someone said that was nice to me. I had this occasion just last week. I got a nice note written to me and actually to my wife, Jenny, and it was so interesting to me. The person writing the note said this. They said, Greg and Jenny, thanks for being willing to share your story about becoming foster parents in the foster system. Because of your story, I have decided to kind of take that step myself, and now I'm becoming licensed to be a foster parent myself. And they said, I probably wouldn't have done that if I hadn't heard you, kind of going first and sharing your story. And I got to tell you, when I read that note, I felt exactly like you think I would feel. I felt awesome. Now, it's interesting to me, I already knew the story. I knew that us telling our story had that effect on someone and that they had taken that step. But just because I knew it, it actually didn't necessarily make me feel great. It was when the person chose to express it to me that Jenny and I read that note and we think, that's awesome. And this is how it works, right? Because this is how it works probably with the person you're thinking of right now that said something nice to you. You think, that person's awesome. I'd like to hang out with that person more often. That person's an encourager to me. I like that person. Let me have you bring to mind something else. I want you to bring to mind a recent time when someone said something critical to you. They complained to you. It was negative. It was something that was wrong with you, and they were announcing it to you. Can you think of a time just recently when someone said something critical to you? I've had that happen recently also. I was down visiting my brother and his family last weekend, and my 11-year-old nephew came to me and said, hey, Uncle Greg, your forehead's getting bigger. Truth hurts, I guess, right? But it's like this is my 11-year-old nephew. I used to think he was cool until last weekend. And then you know what? I'm going to go pound you in ping pong right now. That's what It's amazing, isn't it? The effect it has on us to either bring some peace into our lives or to bring some stress or strain into our lives just based on someone's words to us. Now, so far, I've talked about being on the receiving end of either encouraging words or discouraging words. But I just want to ask you for a moment to think about yourself on the giving end of that. I mean, there's a continuum, right? From someone who's being a complete encourager to someone who's a complete discourager, someone who's positive to negative, someone who's affirming to critical. And it's not black or white, but you probably live on one end or the other of this spectrum. And so I need your help here just for a moment. I'm going to ask you to be honest. Show of hands in the room. I want to know which end of the spectrum you fall on, just in an honest assessment. When you're the one kind of giving this stuff out, not on the receiving end of it, are you more of an encourager or are you more of a critic? How many of you fall on the side of encourager? Show of hands. Okay, that's good. How many of you would say, the truth is, I fall on the side of critic? Yeah? Is there anyone in the room right now who you raised your hand as the encourager, but when the person next to you didn't raise their hand as a critic, you elbowed them? That happened? That means you're a critic. Truthful, that was funny, but it wasn't. It was true, right? It's very important to think about how we see ourselves in this light. Because depending on the circumstances you're in, you either leave peace in your wake or you leave stress in your wake. You could think about this in the different settings that you're in. Just think about your home. In your home, when you walk out the door, does your family think, oh, I'm going to miss that person? He or she brings peace and encouragement. I can't wait till they get home. Or when you walk out the door from your home, does your family think, whew, little reprieve until they come back home again. What about at your workplace? The team you're a part of, your boss or your employees. Like, are you the person who, like, when you're in the room, people are glad to see you. When you're walking in from the parking lot and they see out the window, they're like, I can't wait for that person to come in here. I look forward to hanging out with them. Or not. How about with your extended family? Christmas season is a season of extended family. When you're with your extended family, are you the person who people think, oh, that's a peace-giving person? Or are you the critic at Christmas? This is very important for anyone who's a follower of Jesus, in part because when Jesus came into the world on that night in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago, let me just come back to the announcement that the angels made. This is the announcement. That is not the announcement. I'm going to read you the announcement because I can read it right back there. Suddenly, a great company of heavenly hosts appeared with the angel, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth, peace." And over this Christmas season, we're talking about the nature of peace on earth, peace in everyday life, peace in our experience. And in a couple of weekends on Christmas Eve, I'm going to talk about how a person could actually find true peace with God, this inner peace. Next week, I'm going to talk to you. I hope every one of you will be here. About how this Christmas could be a difference-making Christmas for the toughest relationship you have. To wonder if this Christmas you could be the peacemaker in that relationship. But before we even get to the toughest relationships that we have and thinking the follower of Jesus would be the peacemaker, let's just step all the way back and talk about the nature of how you and I carry ourselves all the time, and whether we're a person that breeds this peace on earth or whether we're working against the mission of Jesus and bringing stress and chaos to people's lives. And so I actually usually in a message wait till I get to kind of the end to tell you what the takeaway is, what the assignment is, if you will, the next steps. I'm just going to start with that tonight. So I'm going to announce two things to you. This is where the whole message is going. It's not a mystery at all. Okay, here's the first one. When anything positive or encouraging comes to mind for you, I want you to express it. Anything. If you see someone has a nice sweater, you should say it. If you think someone's doing a good job at being a mom or a dad, you should say it. If you think someone's doing a great job at work, you should say it. If you thought the meal that was prepared for you tonight was great, say it. I'm suggesting to you that any time something positive comes to mind, you should say it. If it's your boss, say it. If it's your employee, say it. If it's your mom, say it. If your mother-in-law, say it. If it's your spouse, say it. If it's your children, say it. I'm asking you to express everything positive that comes to mind. If 20 things positive come to mind, I'm asking you to say 20 things out loud, because the things that come to mind that are positive but are not spoken don't bring peace. I'm asking you to text it, or call someone, or email someone, or actually write them a handwritten note. I'm asking you to put it on Facebook or Twitter. I'm asking you to hire an airplane and write it in the sky above somebody's house. All I want you to do every time something positive or affirming comes to mind about another person is to express it. And be the kind of person who brings peace and leaves peace in your wake. Some of you will have holiday gatherings at your place over the coming weeks. This is the best definition of hospitality that I've ever heard. Hospitality is when someone leaves your home feeling better about themselves, not better about you. And so all that time and stress and energy you put into impressing people with preparing your place. Make sure you at least spend an equal or exceedingly amount of energy expressing your gratitude and affirmation to the people who are in your place. That's one side of it. Very simple. Here's the second side of it. When anything negative or critical comes to mind, don't express it. If you don't like someone's sweater, just don't say anything. If you don't like how the meal tasted, just don't say anything. If you don't think someone's a great mom or a dad, even if they're your child, don't say anything. Don't text them, don't email them, don't call them, don't put it on Facebook. Don't say anything. If there's 20 times when something critical comes to mind, all 20 times, decide not to say it. Does this seem crazy to you? Does it seem naive to you? Do you think there ought to be exceptions to the rule? We'll get to those in a moment. Maybe there are some exceptions. But on the basis of this principle, I want you to think how between now and the end of this year, you wouldn't say one critical or negative thing. That in the course of 3 weeks, if you're the person right now where people walk on eggshells around you, they would see a different you in the next 3 weeks. Why? Because you are a follower of Jesus. And Jesus came to bring peace on earth. And you want to be part of spreading that peace around. Now, you might think that that's naive. In fact, you might think the sermon's kind of done. You told us everything. Well, I could pray and go, but I got about 20 more minutes available to me. So actually, I'm going to teach you some scriptures. I think people, when they hear this at first, think, Greg, that's not realistic. And I always think, why not? Would the scriptures actually teach what I'm suggesting you to do here? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read 4 verses of scriptures to you. One of the things that happens to me all the time is I talk to people about reading the Bible for themselves, and sometimes people will say, well, Greg, I can't read the Bible. It doesn't make sense to me like it makes sense to you. And I think these 4 verses, well, they're more practical maybe than the average 4 verses in the Bible. They're 4 verses you could come across as you're reading the Bible, and they're not complicated. They're not complicated at all. You don't need a Master of Divinity degree to understand them. All you need to do is when you come to these verses, you need to slow down, stop, and think, I'm supposed to do that. And so if you're not a follower of Jesus today, I don't hold you accountable for this. These are verses that are for followers of Jesus. I think I would suggest, and I think you'll probably agree when I'm done, that it's actually great advice that you should do whether you're a follower of Jesus or not. If you are a follower of Jesus, I'm asking you to hold yourself accountable to living out these verses, okay? Let's just start with the first one. Romans 12:18 says, if it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. I just break this down. This is how you do it if you were reading it. You say, okay, if it's possible. It may not be possible. If you've been on the receiving end of abuse, I'd say it's not going to be possible. Right? But in most circumstances, it is possible. So if it's possible, as much as it depends on you. You see, most of the time when we decide we're not going to live as encouragers, but instead we're going to live as critics, we decide doing so because we think someone else deserves to hear something. But that's actually not the threshold for whether I would bring peace or not. This is to say there's things I can't control. There's things I can control. I'm one that I can control. And as much as it depends on me, I'll live at peace, and then this is the hard part, right, with some of them. With everyone. I know your brother-in-law is annoying. I know your boss can be a jerk. I know there's people in your life who would make it difficult for you to live at peace and to be a 100% encourager. But I also know this. If it's possible, as much as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Let me show you another verse in the Scriptures. This is beautiful. This is Old Testament, Proverbs, wisdom of the Scriptures. It says this, a person's wisdom yields patience. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense. To take something that could maybe even rightfully offended you and decide, I'm just going to overlook it. That would be a very healthy way to construct your life. Follow this verse. A person's wisdom. See, the Bible's concept of wisdom is opposite of the idea of foolishness. And here's the idea. People who are fools don't understand how yesterday is connected to today and today is connected to tomorrow. They think that every event is random and that I ought to judge every event on its merit and just act how I want to react in the midst of every single event. But people who have wisdom would never look at the world that way. They totally understand that the way I treat someone today is going to have an effect on our relationship tomorrow. And so a person of wisdom yields patience. The Bible's idea of patience is actually the idea of endurance. It means I'll be able to kind of outlast. I'll be able to, even though it's hard, work through. And then I'm going to come to this conclusion that when someone offends me, I'm not going to act offended. I'm going to choose to overlook the offense. My wife has a grandmother. Today's actually her birthday. She would have been 99 years old today. She passed away in 2010, and I was grateful that I got to have about 20 years of knowing Grandma Iney. She was the matriarch of Jenny's family, and Jenny's family, like my family and like your family, has its fair amount of chaos in it. There's lots of storylines and lots of hardship and lots of divorce, and that's family. That's what life is. But for whatever reason, everyone loved and respected Grandma Iney. She's the matriarch. There's nobody who didn't love Grandma. If you were in a tough spot, you'd go to Grandma Iney's house. If you were in a great spot, you'd go to Grandma Iney's house. You'd want to celebrate with her. She's the person who would sit down at the kitchen table with you and listen, right? And 3 months before Grandma Iney died, I knew that I would be charged with leading her funeral. And so I just went over to her house, just the two of us, and said, I'm going to sit down and listen and take some notes so that at her funeral I can describe what it takes to be such a remarkable matriarch in a family. And there was one statement that came out of her mouth, and I wrote it down as fast as I can, and it mirrors Proverbs 19:11. She said, Greg, if you're going to be a good family person, you will have to overlook a lot of faults. This is what I mean when I say, when you notice something that's wrong, just don't say it. Choose to overlook it. Does that seem dangerous to you? Maybe it does to some of you. We'll get to a couple qualifiers in a moment. But on the thrust of it, this brings peace. Let's look at another passage. This is Philippians Chapter 2. There's our word again, everything without grumbling or arguing. Follower of Jesus, this is the threshold for your life and for mine. That the people who experience life around me would experience a peace in their lives. It would be peace on earth to them because I'm there. Why? Because I am not a person who grumbles or argues. This actually gets at the why idea behind grumbling or arguing. He says, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Here's the Apostle Paul's observation. It's my observation today. That if you look out on the landscape of the world, if you scroll through your social media, if you turn on the TV, here's what you're going to find. You're going to find a lot of grumbling and arguing. And you could find that and be drawn into it, or you could actually be the person who lives in a way that's completely different than the rest of the world. And by being distinct, by being completely different, you become a person who isn't part of that crooked and warped generation. And what happens? Then you'll shine among them like stars in the sky. People will look at you and think, he's sharp. She's awesome. And you will have a voice in people's life because there's a peace and a light that comes from you. Last passage. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths. Now, we hear the word unwholesome, the phrase unwholesome talk, and you probably think Paul means cussing, right? Like, don't drop the F-bomb, okay? Don't do it. Like, it's dumb. It's immature. It's whatever. Well, you shouldn't, but that's not what this is about. Unwholesome talk is not about certain bad words. That's not, read the passage. We know what unwholesome talk is. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Unwholesome talk is any kind of talk that doesn't build others up. And the threshold gets a little bigger. Build others up not according to my needs, but according to their needs. It's on this basis, my friends, that I think in a Christmas season, when Jesus says peace should come to earth, and you're my followers, you should bring peace to earth, that I think the threshold is right to say, whenever something positive or encouraging comes to mind, say it. And whenever something negative or critical comes to mind, don't say it. Can you do that? Are we good? I mean, let's just say between now and Christmas, 2 weeks. Nothing negative, nothing critical coming out of your mouth. And bring peace to those around you. Some of you will say, Greg, that's not realistic. And I want to acknowledge for a moment that I don't think it is completely realistic. It's more realistic than you might think it is, but there are situations the scriptures give us where you can't just be happy-clappy all the time. And so let me talk just for a moment about the threshold for correction. To say, it's true that at times a critical word does need to be spoken. If you look at the life and ministry of Jesus, here's what you'll find, was that to people who were considered to be outcasts, people who were considered to be sinners, Jesus spoke quite positively to them all of the time. Interestingly, people who were nothing like Jesus really liked Jesus. But there were some people who were misrepresenting who God was. And Jesus did have a critical word for them. So if you and I think, hey, there have to be some exceptions to this rule of never saying anything negative, let me describe for you what I think the scriptures, and even those verses we described, talk about as the threshold for saying something critical. Here's the first one. Am I responsible for that person? Am I responsible for them? Because in some places, God has placed you in authority. If you're the parent of a child and you never correct them, you're actually a bad parent, right? You are responsible for guiding them and teaching them and correcting them at times when they're off course. If you're a coach and you have a team and you're responsible for a group of people. If you're a judge and you have a courtroom and you never speak what is true, you're responsible. If you're a teacher in a classroom, if you're a boss at work, you're charged with the idea of leading people. And so in those situations, let's be open to the idea that sometimes you need to give a word of correction. There will be 3 more thresholds you'll want to cross here in a moment. But this is my point here. If you're not in that situation, if you're talking to someone and you don't have a God-given authority over them, then I would strongly encourage you to pause and decide whether you're going to say anything critical at all. You see, one of the ways I know Christianity has gone off the rails in the United States is that the perception of Christians is that and a legitimate perception of Christians is that they're judgmental. And that Christians are walking around telling people who aren't even Christians how they're supposed to live. And the scriptures talk about that. They say, don't do that. Why would you do that? What role, what authority do you have in the life of someone who doesn't even claim to believe this? Stop it. But if you're responsible for someone, you may have to give a word of correction. Then you'd have to go to the next threshold. Here's the next question. Are my words helpful? Remember, the purpose of wholesome talk is to build someone up according to their needs. Most of us use a different threshold than this. Most of us ask the question, am I justified? Am I justified in my criticism? But that's not the question. The question is, if by saying this I could actually help someone, then I would say it. If I have in mind to help them, not just critique them. If I have in mind to lead them somewhere and walk with them through it, then I could say it. Here's a third threshold. Do they know I love them? I don't know if you've ever been on the receiving end of criticism from someone you didn't think loved you. I know what the results are. Bitterness. Every time. And so if you think, there are some places I need to be a critic. I need to correct someone. Well, do you have responsibility for them? Are you being helpful to them? Do they know I love them? Then you can speak what the Bible calls the truth in love. Fourth threshold. Have I chosen a setting? Have I thought about the time and place in which I'm going to correct them? And I could go on a long rant about this, but let's just say this. How about not Christmas dinner? How about not lobbing something in a public setting and embarrassing someone with your critique? And instead, you would say, you know what? If I'm going to build them up, if I need them to know I love them, if I'm responsible to correct them, I'm going to pull them off to the side. I'm going to choose a healthy time and place to speak these words to them. That's the threshold for correction. Very briefly, we talk about the threshold for correction. Let's talk about the threshold for affirmation. There's actually only one question to ask here. Is it true? Flattery doesn't help. No need to make things up and tell someone things that aren't actually true about themselves. But the moment you stop to notice, the moment something comes to mind, you could be driving down the road, you could be laying in bed at night, you could be doing wherever it is and whatever comes to mind. Just make sure whatever comes to mind that's affirming and true, you express it. Because by doing so, you become different than everybody else. There's lots of people in this world who are known for their judgment and their criticism and their pride. You could be, among a generation like that, like a star shining in the sky that brings light and the peace of God to earth. There's a pastor in Kansas City who taught the Philippians passage that I just shared with you, where it said, do everything without arguing or complaining, grumbling or complaining. And to kind of make this take root in his church family, he passed out bracelets to everyone in the church. And he said, I want you to wear this bracelet. We're going to go on a 21-day challenge. And here's the idea. Put the bracelet on your left arm, and then the moment you catch yourself, you are critical or complaining or grumbling, you just move it to the other arm, and you have to start your 21 days over. All right, we're trying to go 21 days straight without being a critic, without arguing, without complaining. And there's a lot of back and forth on people's wrists, as you might imagine. It took root. Over 126,000 bracelets were sold around the world as people started talking about this. And for the pastor, he said it was 6 months into the exercise before he made it 21 days straight. There's other people who are still wearing their bracelets today. I don't have any bracelets for you. But we do have a window between now and Christmas to say, could you be the person? Whether your instincts are to be a critic or whether your instincts are to be an encourager, could you be the person who every time something comes to mind that's affirming, you say it, and every time something comes to mind that's critical, you don't say it? I want to pray for that right now. God, thanks for this day, for your word. And honestly, God, for not taking it easy on us. Thank you, God, for never letting us just be content by participating in the brokenness of this world, and instead calling us out to the kind of life that would be so attractive when others find out we are how we are because of you. I pray we live that life in this season. In Jesus' name.